if you don't take your seats, we'll start anyway. Erick, if you care to start? The commander of the 2nd South Carolina.
Gather in, folks, I have tales to talk. I don't need any microphones, as you can tell. One of the reasons why they make me commander in the field. But actually what I'm portraying right now is I'm Captain Jacob Clark from the 2nd Regiment, South Carolina Continental Line. I have been asked by Colonel Marion and General Moultrie to come talk to you because you may have heard this thing of this disaster in Savannah. We want you to honor our men and understand what happened there. So I'm here to tell you what truly happened. So what you are hearing from rumors and these newspapers, that you know the truth. And one of the first questions we've already been asked is why? Why did we, the Southern Army in Charleston, march to Savannah? Simple reason, we had no choice. General Prevost had freedom of movement. He could do anything he wanted. He was going up and investing in Augusta, Briar Creek. Hell, he almost came down to Charleston. We had to fight him outside at the racetrack, at the neck. We had to do something. The reality was, we didn't have much to do it with. My regiment, the 2nd South Carolina, having been formed in 1776, by now most of my combat veterans have left. Their 3 years have done, they've returned home to their families. Even though we were pretty healthy for a regiment, we were brigaded in the 2nd Brigade under General Hugie. I had 30 men, or 300 men in my regiment, about 30 men per company, which wasn't bad for this time. But the whole Army was no more than 800 men. There was no way that we could, in reality, march to Savannah and take that city. So General Lincoln talked with Governor Rutledge, we need help. So we asked the government, we asked Congress, can you send us help? And they told us that there was a French fleet in the area. So they asked France, and they said, yes, we will help you. D'Estaing was in the area, a fleet of 37 ships, 22 warships, 4,000 soldiers. Definitely a lot more than what we had in the Southern Army. So when word reached us in Charleston that the France had agreed that they're coming, morale increased. The militia started to come out of nowhere to join the Army. It was amazing. We couldn't get them to take the field all the time. And all of a sudden, here they come in droves and hundreds. For they said, this is a sure thing. We have the French Navy, we have the French Army. We can walk right up to the walls of Savannah and demand their surrender. And we'll be there to watch the humiliation as they march out and lay down their arms. I had my doubts. As an old crusty combat veteran, I had fought the French for 5 years up north during this thing called, I guess you call it French and Indian War. I had healthy respect for them. But didn't we just fight a war against them not a few years ago? Now they're our allies. Could they truly be trusted? I followed my orders. Colonel Marion told us to prepare the men. And on September 5th, the order was actually given. General Lincoln instructed all officers to return to your units, prepare the Army to march, inspect all arms and equipment. Rations were issued. And I knew when the command was given to issue regimental coats to the men that they were taking this campaign seriously. So we cooked our rations, we prepared our muskets, and on the 8th, we began the march. And it was a nice day. It was a nice, comfortable fall day. The sun shone. Literally, the men had a little spring in their step as we started the march. To about the 3rd day on the road. And spring started to go away a little bit. Rain started to show up. That nice October, September-ish fall rain, I'm sure you all well versed, made marching a little bit more difficult. It was actually on the 12th, as we were marching, that word reached us that the French had already arrived at Savannah and were starting the investment. This concerned General Lincoln because his worry was that the French were trying to beat us to this victory, that they are going to take the city and not us. So he asked us to increase our pace. For us Continentals, it's no problem to increase our pace. The militia, on the other hand, not so much. And we were also dragging our own artillery. The 4th South Carolina had one 18-pound gun, one 6-pounder, and about 4 or 5 4-pounders. Those had no problem with the mud, but those big 18, that big 6, slowed down our pace. Then Mother Nature says, you know, I don't think you're wet enough yet. And the rain picked up. The temperature started to drop. By the 12th, we're outside of Cherokee Creek. By the 13th, we're approaching the border. And we finally crossed over to Georgia on the 14th. We're only averaging about 5 miles a day. This was taking a little bit longer than we expected to march to Savannah. But when we did arrive outside the town of Ebenezer, we had people waiting for us. General McIntosh and his Georgians were there waiting for us. And His Excellency George Washington sent us reinforcement of a detachment of Virginia Continentals, and the 1st Continental Dragoons had arrived. The problem was we had the river before us, the Savannah River, and the British had took all the boats. We were trying to find a way to get this army across. We were concerned. Again, General Lincoln didn't know what de-esting was up to. So he asked Pulaski, can you send some of your horsemen across? We did find one canoe. So 2 of our men would paddle the canoe. We put one trooper in the middle. His horse swam next to him. We got 30 men across. It was enough to send the detachment, and finally the Southern Army met with the French outside of Savannah. It took us several days to get across when the Dragoons came back, and they told us that de-esting had already demanded the surrender of the city, which wasn't really the bad part. It's when they told us that he had demanded the surrender of the city in name of the King of France, not on behalf of the Continental Congress. Needless to say, General Lincoln was really upset. So he pushed us to get across. We have to get going. We have to. But Mother Nature goes, no, I'm going to keep raining. We don't want you to overheat too much. It wasn't until the 23rd that we finally arrived outside the city of Savannah. And what a sight to see. The French camp was already arrayed before us. They were 1,500 yards from the wall, and they left a copse of trees between their camp and the city, so a lot of the cannonballs were hitting the woods, well, not their camp, but their camp was 3,000 yards wide, all full of their tents and equipment. So we arrived, General Lincoln, Colonel Marion, all the senior officers went in, we started to develop our battle plan. And it was decided that we will do a formal siege, that we will start digging our siege lines. So I told my men, put your coats away, get on your frocks and shirts, we're going to start digging. So on the night of the 23rd, we started to dig. We kept going, the rain on and off till about the 24th when the British decided they needed to introduce themselves. And they came out of the city. Late at night, about the 23rd, 24th, we engaged them. The actual lines were less than 300 yards from the wall. In the dark, we're fighting, tooth and nail. In my personal, humble opinion, that is when the failure happened. 2 major things that I saw in my military career that influenced my decision that this may not go well was the rain and the fact that the one French siege engineer was killed. No one else in this vast French army knew how to do proper siege works, how to dig. But we continued to dig anyways. That's what we were told to do by General Lincoln, so we were out there, we're digging our positions. The 4th brought up their 2 guns that could effectively shoot at the British, the 18-pounder and the 6-pounder, to try to cover us. So 2 days later, I guess the British didn't think we took them seriously, they came out again. Their Highlanders came out, and so in the dark, once again, we are fighting with bayonets, with our shovels, engage each other, but we were able to push them back and continue to work on our lines. They put over 100 riflemen out there, start shooting and picking off our men. So I'd lead my men forward to cover our working party. Then they add more insult to injury, and the night of about the 24th. The French thought we were under attack. The problem is the artillerymen, what few guns they had, fell short. And their shot and shell fell into our workers. That both French and our own men were wounded and killed by their own guns. General Lincoln, Marion, General Huger, they are all arguing with the estimate that we had to go now. The rain hadn't stopped. The ground is turning to muck and mire. We knew that our supplies were starting to run low. What was really bad, we found out, was the French supply lines 13 miles away. They were unloading the ship's guns, 24-pounders used for the siege. And what little oxen they could find was trying to drag them over this mud to the city of Savannah. We had to wait for the guns to arrive. So we were told by the Esting to continue to dig, to continue to work on the works. So I was concerned, having been through sieges. So using my spyglass, I went out with Marion, I went out with Lincoln and General Huger. We looked. The one thing that we found was rather unique was the British had learned their lessons from the attack of Fort Sullivan. That they had built their defenses out of palmetto logs and sand. We realized that this is going to be even harder than we expected. So we continued to work. The guns finally arrived, and by early October, we had over 54 24-pound or better siege guns, 15 mortars, all in position, ready to go. So we were going to wait for the morning. The signal to shoot, well, the British played reveille, and their colors went up, was the signal to fire. So that early morning, it decided not to rain that day. We could hear the sounds of the drums beating from Savannah. And the order was given, and the barrage began. And on the very first shot, we knocked down the flagpole. That Union Jack fell to the ground. We all had hope that maybe perhaps this was a good sign. Till about 2 hours later, when the entire left of our siege line fell apart. The guns fell forward. They fell apart because we did not properly dig the positions correctly for the guns. We had to stop the bombardment to rebuild our positions. As I was watching them shelling and firing on the city, I also noticed that they weren't aiming at the defenses. They were lobbing their shot and shell into the city, which again made no sense to Marion and to General Lincoln, who would argue with this, with the Esting, that you're not doing any harm to the defenses, you're harming the civilians in the city, and he paid us no mind. The weather was getting worse. It was now hot during the day and rain and cold at night. Disease was starting to run through. At least we had our wool coats, we had to admit, but our French allies, having come from the Caribbean, were wearing linen uniforms. Their cartridge boxes were turning green from mildew. Their paper cartridges were becoming useless. We kept pushing. We had to attack now before we ran out of supplies. So on early October, and I believe it was October 4th, they decided, well, let's try fire. So they fired carcasses. But once again, they're firing these incendiaries, but not at the redoubts or the defenses. They're firing them into the city. It was too wet to burn. So on the night of the 8th, the French launched an assault to go after the abattis in front of the defenses, to light them on fire. Still too wet to burn. Now we had no choice. We had to plan our assault. I have seen my fair share. I have been on the field at Carillon when the 42nd went through into the abattis and fought to the last man. I've been at Quebec. So I knew what to expect. So we held our meeting and we came up with a plan. Having looked at the city, we knew to the British right, our left, were these three small redoubts. One in the center, known as Spring Hill. And we have been told that only loyalists from South Carolina were manning these positions. And we also found that there was a long ditch that moved alongside the great woods and the swamp parallel to the city, that we could go down and use this ditch to hide our movement to these redoubts. So the plan was decided on the night around midnight, October 9th, that we would form 5 assault columns. D'Estaing himself would lead the first 3. His own 250 grenadiers out front would use this covered way to get near Spring Hill, and in the darkness leap out, cut through the abatis, charge into the redoubt, the other 2 columns in support. For us in the Southern Army, we were organized into 2 columns. General McIntosh was given the 1st and 5th regiments to support. General Huger was given the fine task of leading a deception, a feint, on the other side of the field to draw the British attention away. And Colonel Lawrence was given command of our brigade, consisting of us, the combined South Carolina Light Infantry, and 1 battalion of Charleston Militia. Following us into the breach with Pulaski and his cavalry, so the idea that the French would punch through, open the hole. We would come through in both our columns, head to the 2 smaller redoubts, and Pulaski and his legion would come screaming through and take the rear of the defenses. General Lincoln would hold the reserve in case we needed support. But the key to the attack, as D'Estaing told us, would be surprise. So that is why we're going to be doing it in the darkness. There will be no artillery preparation. The guns will remain silent. He had trusted guides, men who had been in Savannah before, who would lead us to our launch points. It would be easy to find our way. The sick and wounded were to remain in the camp, keep the fires burning, make it sound like the camp was still occupied. And then we were told that the muskets will be unloaded when we attacked, that we will rely on the bayonet. The concern was someone pulling the trigger by mistake. That it even stated by court-martial, you are ordered not to load until told to do so in the line, punishable by death if you disobey this order. But because we're fighting in the dark, we had to make sure that we wouldn't shoot at one another. So we were ordered to take our waistcoats off and wear them outside of our uniforms and put white cockades in our helmets and our hats so we'd be able to identify ourselves. So we had the rest of the day to prepare our men. We still issued 40 rounds, a couple extra flints. Everyone changed their uniform. We waited for midnight. The French columns, they left first. Our guide came for us, had General Lawrence. Marion led us out. And into the woods we went. I may not personally know the terrain around Savannah, but I can tell which way was north and which way is east. And our guide did not go the right way. Because even I'm looking up at the stars going, that doesn't look right. And we started to realize that our guide had completely turned us away and we were heading due north. We were heading away from the city. Finally, I told Marion, who told Lawrence, and we stopped the guide who finally realized, I don't know where I'm going. It's been over a year since I've been here. This has all changed. I did not know. The assault was going to happen at dawn. We had to get back, so we backtracked. And luckily for us, that the camp was still having its fires on, we could see the glow in the distance of our camp, which allowed us to go back to our starting point. And from there, we were able to make our approach. By then, unfortunately, the sun was starting to rise. You could see the pale gray approaching. As we started our movement along the covered way, we heard fife and drums from the front, which startled us because we were told if we were to pull our triggers or muskets, we're going to be executed for making noise. And yet before us were fife and drums playing from where the French were supposed to be. And then to make it more interesting, the haunting sound of bagpipes coming across the field. There wasn't supposed to be any Highlanders on our side. Obviously, someone's information was wrong. As we got closer and the sun started to rise, we could hear the firing from the right side. The General Huger's deception must have already been seen, and they engaged. And then we heard firing from our front. Then all the drums gave the command to charge bayonets, and we could hear the cry of "Vive la Roi!" as the French launched their attack before we were even in position. So by the time we arrived on the field, we came out of that ditch and started to go into our line of battle. The crushed and dismembered white uniforms already covered the field. Marion gave us the command to advance, Lauren leading the way from the front, which he always seems to do. We start our approach across the field, trying not to step on the numerous casualties that we already saw. I went back to look to check on my man and realized the Charlestown militia hadn't even left the woods. It would only be the 2nd South and the light infantry making the charge. And they were firing for all. The British had us in a crossfire. As we were getting closer to the abattis, we could see D'Estaing himself being carried from the field. It's really hard to encourage your men forward into such maelstrom when the commanding general himself is being pulled from the field, but Marion could do it. He led us across. We went parallel to the abattis and got caught in one of the most murderous crossfires I've ever seen. You could hear the sections of chain. They were firing lengths of chain 5, 6 feet long from their guns. We could hear this whistle. They were firing broken knives at us. And they had us between where the Spring Hill was, the 2 redoubts had us in a deadly crossfire. We had to do something to save our men. So Marion led us into the moat, below the redoubt, so that the British would have to rise up to shoot down, that would be outside the range of their cannon. So in we charged, going over the crumbled bodies, trying to find our way through. So we took our position. I organized my fire line. To hell with orders. I ordered my men to prime and load. We began a furious fire to cover the assault. In the midst comes Marion. And right behind him are 2 flags. Gained from us at the Battle of Fort Sullivan, the red one, the blue one, charging forward. Lieutenant Hume takes the flag. He climbs up on the side of the parapet. He drops red flag in position before he's hit by a volley of 5 rounds and drops to the ground. Lieutenant Bush is coming up with the blue flag. He's starting to go up. The problem is the ground is so slick. It's wet from the mud. It's wet from all the blood. He's wounded. As he's starting to go down, he tosses the flag to be grabbed by Jasper himself. He plants the flag on top, both flags, and for a moment, the briefest moment, time froze. And a little breeze, and our flags waved for only a few seconds before reality hit us hard. The British charged us. They counterattacked. They went after the flag. Sergeant McDonald was able to go up. He grabs the red flag. He knew he had to get the flags out of their knees, hit numerous times. But he kept the colors around him, and he started to leap off the field. Jasper grabs the blue flag. That's when the British attacked. Lieutenant Gray gets between him and the charging bayonets and is hit several times. Jasper has no choice. He takes the flag and he throws it down to Lieutenant Bush, who collapses under the weight of the fire. I see him go down. I have no choice. My men have to charge into this to give us time to withdraw from the field, so we lead my company forward in close hand-to-hand combat. It gets to the point, it is the most savage fighting I have ever, and I have seen many years fighting the French and their Indians. I have never seen something this brutal. Everything. I still have the nicks in my sword. Men were using just the bayonets off their weapons. Their own fists, rocks, wood, bayonets, personal knives. They were gripped as close as possible to buy what little time. But we were being pushed back. And then they rolled a 3-pounder right into the ditch with us and started firing with grape shot. We couldn't stand. We had no choice. I turned, I couldn't see the blue flag. I didn't know if Lieutenant Bush had made it out or not. Marion gave the order to fall back before we are completely destroyed. So as I turned, there in the middle of the ditch stands Lawrence. Arms outright. Tears in his eyes. Just standing there. Now I have a tough choice. What do I do? Do I lead my men back? Do I go try to find the blue flag? Or do I try to save my brigade commander for the sacred day. I go up and I grab him. He refused to move. I don't know how he dug his feet in that mucky all ground that he did, but he refused, stating that my honor prevents me from surviving this disgrace. And he closed his eyes again, waiting for the shot. I don't know what would you do in your place. So I hit him in the back of the head. I grabbed him by the scuff, and I was able to pull him as my men were falling back out into that open field where now, once again, we're caught in the crossfire as we're trying to fall back. We're spreading out, trying to get some distance between us, and in charges Pulaski, trying to buy us what little time we could. So here comes the galloping horsemen of Pulaski as they charge through us and into their own distance. As I come to learn that Pulaski falls from his saddle not too much longer after that. We find one raised causeway and it seems to draw everyone's attention. Marion is still trying to rally. We're trying to fall back in order. We just can't maintain anything. The men are breaking. So they go down this causeway to get out of the low ground, and the British have it in their guns. And once more, we're caught in a murderous crossfire. We make it to the swamp. We get back to the camp. Our charge is over. General Lincoln, on behalf of the Esting, requested a 24-hour ceasefire under a flag of truce so we can account for our men. The 2nd Regiment lost half of its men. Their bodies broken, their blood mingled into the sides of the spring hill. We go pull, we couldn't find Lieutenant Bush, we couldn't find the flag, but we buried our men. We went back, hostilities resumed. Not much. We fired some artillery, they fired back at us. General Lincoln wanted to continue the attack. He believed that we could still win the day. The French were broke. D'Estaing in his wound did not want to leave his tent. And after a couple of days, they withdrew. They packed their equipment, they packed their tents, they returned to their ships. Our militia was leaving in droves. Just like they arrived in droves to see this great victory, they definitely left as fast, if not faster, at the end. But there were maybe a 600-man army trying to face the walls of Savannah. General Lincoln had no choice. We marched back to Charleston. And if that wasn't bad enough, when we arrived in Charleston, a smallpox epidemic broke out. The worst that they've seen in 20 years. So that's the truth, ladies and gentlemen. That's what really occurred out there. So they may call this a disaster, a defeat. Perhaps military it was. As a commander, as a captain, I only have one request. Remember my men and what they gave for your liberty. Questions? Yeah. Sir?
Was the blue flag ever found?
Yes. Currently, the blue flag is in the Smithsonian Institute being restored. The British officer who actually found the flag took it home. He decided enough's enough. Maybe he was cleaning out his closets. Was returned to South Carolina. It's currently up. It's Smithsonian being restored. And yes, we have found blood. We believe what we have found was Lieutenant Bush's blood and Jasper's.
If I may add, the flag was restored. The South Carolina State Museum and the Smithsonian acquired it from the descendant of the commander at Savannah, the British commander, and it now resides at the Smithsonian, and it's supposed to come back to the State Museum in the next year or so.
As we keep saying, the next year or so.
Yeah.
So the current flag at the State Museum is a reproduction, but
Right.
yes, the original will be coming
But
home.
the original was on exhibit at the State Museum about about 10 years ago.
Yes. Sir?
Does the Spring Hill Redoubt exist in any?
Yes, they actually built a reproduction of the Spring Hill Redoubt. There is actually a nice little museum there that talks about the assault in Savannah, and they preserved it. Of course, it is completely surrounded by modern buildings, so you have to use your imagination. Well, folks, enjoy your time here at the symposium.
3 cheers for Captain Nason and the second shout. Hip, hip, hurrah! Hip, hip, hurrah! Hip, hip, hurrah! Maybe I'll get promoted.